All right, check. Okay. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty getting our Zoom room up and working. So for those that are streaming with us and those that are waiting in the room, bear with us for just a minute or two, and we'll see if we can't. Looks good.
All right, I got him now.
Oh, Todd says he has you. All right. So, okay, good. Oh, I think I got hung up somehow. Okay, all right. He hung up. All right, Todd, you can see Terry and John on, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Good. So we have folks that are streaming with us, folks that are Zooming with us, and folks that are in the room with us. So welcome to one and all. Glad to have you here. Most of the presentation at the start is going to be involve a PowerPoint. And I want to begin by apologizing to those who are streaming with us or Zooming with us because I need to see the presentation and operate it myself. We can't connect it to where Todd can put it on the computer and you have that nice clean flat shot of the slide. So he is zoomed in on the television, and you'll have to bear with that bit of unprofessional work here. On my fault, not Todd's. I'm sure it's a good shot. So, yeah, the intention is to talk a bit about Unitarian Universalist history and a little bit about the unique history of our congregation, and then sort of wrap up by talking about what it means to be a member of our congregation. And I've got quite a few slides, and I don't want to spend much time on them because it would take quite a while, and I don't want to bore you. So I'm going to try to move through them fairly quickly. Okay, so you can watch the slideshow, and I'll try to move through fairly quickly without spending too much time on any one slide. And if I do get to going too fast and you need to stop me and clarify, just stick your hand up. We'll try to save the questions toward the end, but that'll be okay. All right? Okay, so yes, Unitarian Universalist history. When did it begin? I like to say that it started actually with this guy. Some people would say it started in the 1500s in Transylvania. Some people would say it started in 1961 when the Unitarian Universalist Association formed. In fact, the research on religion in America classifies our religion as an NRM, which stands for New Religious Movement, because Unitarian Universalism never existed before 1961. There were Unitarians, there was Universalists, but this thing, Unitarian Universalism, is rather new. But I like to go back to the beginning of Christianity to say that our religion is as old as Christ. and that's more than just a metaphor. The original followers of Jesus, Jewish followers, understood him to be a man. It would have been anathema for them to worship a human being. So he was a Messiah in the sense that he had teachings that they considered worthy of their attention and the kind of person they wanted to follow. So they had what we would call a humanistic Christology, which basically means that he was they viewed Jesus as a human being. That is essentially what Unitarianism means. Unitarianism is the argument that there's only one God, and Jesus could not be God, right? Jesus is somebody worth following his teachings, but he could not be God because there's only one God, not three, if you will. So it's what we call a humanistic Christology, not a divinity, if you will. So, yeah, they believe Jesus was only human. And the thing that would save us is following his humanitarian teachings. And this is all part of what Unitarianism really is about. And so The things that Jesus taught his followers were to love everyone, to share your belongings, to live sustainably, right? Just give us this day our daily bread, to heal the sick, to feed the poor. The law is made to benefit human beings, not human beings to benefit the law. So civil disobedience is appropriate at times. We should always engage in whatever we do nonviolently. And he believed in equality. This is why he was often criticized and condemned, because he associated with people who were often left out, including women, the poor, the untouchables. Those sort of things were reportedly in his circles. And then, of course, to forgive one another so that we can move forward together. So I would think that when we see this list, that most of us here would say, yeah, those are my values. And that's what I'm about too, regardless of who said them. Those are things that I think will make the world a better place. Interestingly enough, the first systematic Christian theologian was Origen of Alexandria. Now, Origen of Alexandria was born in the 2nd century. He's the first one by systematic theologian that actually wrote down what it was that Christians are supposed to believe. And he did something rather interesting. He said, all humans and even devils shall finally be restored through the mediation of Christ. That's universalism. And he was one of those, like a lot of folks, who couldn't understand how a loving God could possibly burn somebody in hell forever. And so the first systematic theologian said that even the demons, even the devils, not just human beings, but all souls, will be delivered from eternal condemnation through the mediation of Christ. That was a very early expression of universalism. And interestingly enough, he also, in order to explain how on earth children could be born with sin who have never sinned before, they're born in sin, he came up with this idea that human souls must have existed in a previous state, and we're just here to sort of work things out over and over until we get it right. So he was even a reincarnationist, which is something a lot of us don't understand about early Christianity, just how diverse they were. So unfortunately, he was tortured to death in 250, and his works were declared heresy in 543 and were ordered destroyed, although the Catholic Church has had a love-hate relationship with him. Pope Benedict actually encouraged people to give Origen a second thought. Around that same time as his death, another individual was born, another theologian named Arius, and he believed and also preached that the Father is superior to the Son. As the Christology was changing and more people began to look at Jesus as a divinity, particularly when it was Hellenized, right? His Jewish followers wouldn't have accepted this, but the Hellenists, the Greeks, had no problem accepting a human being as God. And so Jesus was becoming deified, and there was a lot of debate. Was he human? Was he God? And so Arius was one of those who, in no uncertain terms, said, no, the Father was before the Son. The Son is not a God. He did not exist before creation. Jesus was basically a human being. And they named this belief Arianism, even though it was a common belief, because he was sort of leading the charge on the argument. When the Emperor Constantine became a Christian, he wanted to put this debate to rest, and he held the Council of Nicaea, which ended up, giving us the Nicene Creed, which declared the Father and Son were of one substance, homoousios. That was the first time that happened, and it was actually in reaction against the common belief that Jesus was human. Right? So this is when the beginnings of what would become the Trinity was invented in 325 CE. So in the First Council of Constantinople in 381, just a few years later, the Holy Spirit was added to the Creed, inventing the doctrine of the Trinity, which at the same time also Arianism and Unitarianism as such became illegal. Right, so it wasn't only that this was the official stance in 381, it became illegal to say otherwise. So, interestingly enough, these early Christian fathers, if you will, Origen represented Universalism, Arius represented Unitarianism, as I like to say, we were here first. Unitarians and Universalists and Unitarians preceded what was to become established church theology and doctrine. A lot of times we think that we were an antithesis to it, but in fact, it was the earliest of beliefs. Once it was condemned, we had what I call the Dark Ages, which is why there's nothing on the screen there. And that was roughly from the 6th century to the 14th century until we began to enlighten up. And actually the Renaissance came a little bit before the Enlightenment, but what happened here is there was the invention of the printing press toward the end of the Dark Ages, which really probably brought an end to the Dark Ages. And one of the first things that was printed here in the 15th century was, the first book that was printed was the Bible. An extraordinary thing, because the Bible had always been read and interpreted and heard by people. It wasn't something that, I should say it was read by officials and then interpreted by them, and then most people just heard the Bible. Now there was an opportunity to begin reading it for themselves. One of those who did was this man, Michael Servetus, who was a Spanish theologian, and when he read it, he couldn't believe that there wasn't any mention of the Trinity in it. And he couldn't wait to tell everybody, so he wrote a book called On the Errors of the Trinity. And that got him in a lot of hot water, particularly with the Reformers, John Calvin in particular, who ended up hunting him down and eventually arresting him and personally trying him and condemning his books and him to death. And so he was to be bound and taken to Champel and there attached to a stake and burned with his books to ashes. And so there's the poor end of Michael Servetus. But it made him a bit of a martyr, largely because he was a popular fellow, and it wasn't so much that people necessarily agreed with his Unitarian idea, but they thought, it's a lot to kill somebody over. He wasn't that different. And so inherent in our origins is this idea that we shouldn't burn people over their ideas, right? We shouldn't burn people over their books. That's as much part of what Unitarianism is as a belief in one God, which we've probably strayed farther from that than from the belief in tolerance. And then, a few years later, John Sigismund, king of Hungary, prince of Transylvania, was getting tired of the conflict in his community. He was in a community between the Sultan and between Austria, and it was a community that was constantly being battled over for political purposes. There were Catholics there were Protestants there were Muslims there, and there was just a lot of potential for strife. And so he wanted to figure out what religion would be the best religion for his kingdom. And so he held a famous debate in 1567 called the Torda Religious Debate, because it was in Torda, to listen to all the teachers from different religions to see which one he liked best. And he ended up really liking this fellow. This was Francis David, as we call him, who was a Unitarian. And Sigismund mostly related to what he had to say. And he decided, I'm going to become a Unitarian, and we're going to have a Unitarian kingdom. And he appointed Ferenc David the Unitarian bishop of the official church. But here's the remarkable thing. They ended up, because of this saying's often attributed to David, we need not think alike to love alike, they ended up coming up with what was the first religious liberty law in history, guaranteeing religious tolerance, so that even if he was a Unitarian and had a Unitarian bishop, anybody in the kingdom could believe as they wished. And here's what the Edict of Torda, passed in 1568, said: "In every place the preacher shall preach and explain the gospel, each according to his understanding of it, and if the congregation like it, well. If not, no one shall compel them, for their souls would not be satisfied, but they shall be permitted to keep a preacher whose teaching they approve. Therefore, none of the superintendents or others shall abuse the preachers. No one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone, according to the previous statutes, and it is not permitted that anyone should threaten anyone else by imprisonment or by removal from his post for his teaching." 1568. Unfortunately, King Sigismund died in a buggy accident a few years later, and the kingdom reverted to Catholic control, and they grandfathered in all the religions that were protected under this, but had an anti-innovation law where you couldn't say anything new. And Ferenc David said, well, I don't think it makes any more sense to pray to Jesus than it does to pray to Mary, and he ended up in a dungeon and dead 6 months later. So much for this kingdom of tolerance. But this is still where the largest body of traditional Unitarians are in Eastern Europe today. Still a very, very prominent religion there, although a minority. And anyway, the idea spread to lots of people, and particularly Faustus Socinus, who is known as the Italian heretic. He had to flee to Hungary and then to Poland to get away from persecution himself. He actually stopped off to try to get David to recant, and he wouldn't. But he went on to Poland, which was called the Heretics' Asylum, because it was one of the few places you could go and express yourself openly. And he didn't believe in a Trinity. He didn't believe in a hell, so he was kind of both a Unitarian and a Universalist. I would not say he was a Unitarian Universalist, but he was a Unitarian and a Universalist. He didn't think that Jesus died for our sins, but that he was a human being, and that if we wanted to save the world, it would be by following those sorts of teachings, by behaving in the ways that he asked us to behave. So pretty radical, and that then is how it started in Transylvania, moved to Poland, kind of spread through Germany and across Eastern Europe. Now, I used to have a bar that went across the waters from England into the U.S., but that's not really the case. Unitarianism emerged in America during the Enlightenment period, at the same time the country was being founded, and I don't wish to offend anybody by that term founded. Taken might be inappropriate for some people, but you understand what I'm saying. The founders of the United States, not necessarily the original inhabitants of this country, who we tend to leave out of the picture too often. But nevertheless, during the Enlightenment period, there were many of the founders, like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and John Quincy Adams and others, were Unitarians. And they began to express this belief that human beings have a lot of potential for good, for doing good. It was originally, they called it Arminianism, which was an old European Methodist heresy, I think, and then came to call it Unitarianism eventually. But it wasn't called Unitarianism because of the belief in one God and that Jesus was a human being. It was called Unitarianism because they believed in the goodness of humanity, which was, the whole point of the Renaissance and what was rediscovered by the Enlightenment thinkers. This positive appreciation for humanity, human potential, human reason, the ability to help solve some of our own problems in the world. And so King's Chapel, which was among the first churches established in the New World, if you will, in 1686, was an Anglican church, but they ended up installing Reverend James Freeman in 1782. He was a Unitarian minister, which makes it the oldest Unitarian church in the country. So you can see just how long we've been around. In fact, the oldest Puritan church, forgetting the name right now, in Plymouth, became a Unitarian church in 1802. So it's been around a long time, and then the American Unitarian Association was founded in Boston in 1825. So it's hardly a new religious movement if we separate these two ideologies. Speaking of which, John Calvin, of course, came up with some what they call Calvinistic ideas, predestination, and he believed that only a few people would be saved for all eternity, that these were ordained before the foundations of the world. There's nothing anybody can do to change that, and the rest of us are going to suffer in eternal hell. Again, the decision is final. That's a pretty radical, extreme belief, right? That is pretty hopeless, and most of us are going to hell. Okay, and we don't know who they are, but most of us are. And so there was kind of an ideological reaction. Right? The opposite of this would be universalism. And so the universalist reaction was universal atonement. Jesus died for everyone. That there's free will. People can choose salvation or not. It's not predetermined. God only knows who will choose salvation and who won't. And the decision is theirs. So quite the opposite. So this sort of universalism became this reaction against Calvinism or predeterminism. And one of its early preachers was Reverend John Murray, who a Scotsman who ended up having some real troubles, including the loss of his wife and child, and really wanted to get out of the ministry and decided he was going to go just get away from it all and travel by ship off to the so-called New World, the Hand in Hand, which ended up running aground on an island off of New Jersey in 1770. And oddly enough, there was a man on that island named Charles Potter who was a Universalist, and he'd been praying for a Universalist preacher to come along. And so we call this the only Universalist miracle. And he begged and pleaded and finally got Murray to agree to give a sermon in the chapel he had built on this island for this purpose. And the first Universalist sermon was given on September 30th, 1770. And that really got Murray back in the picture. And he became a preacher and started the first Universalist society in America, in Gloucester, Massachusetts, with 61 followers who had been members of the Independent Church of Christ. And they were being persecuted by First Church Parish, which was Calvinistic, for heresy. Now, in these days in the United States, it was still legal for churches to tax, if you will, a tithe of their citizens. And the Universalists refused to pay their taxes, if you will, their tithe. And so the authorities ended up confiscating the church belongings so that they could auction them off to pay for their delinquent taxes. And being the good liberal Universalists they were, they decided to sue the church, the First Church Parish, and they won. And in winning, they ended up really establishing the separation of church and state, and making it illegal for churches to require citizens of their community to pay a tithe to the church. And so then the Universalist Church of America, the national organization, was then formally founded in 1793 in Pennsylvania. Murray was very famous for the Universalists were much more Christian, if you will, traditional in many ways, except their disbelief in hell, which eventually converted to a belief in a loving God more so than a disbelief in hell. But he was famous for saying, "Go out into the highways and byways of America, give the people blanketed with the decaying and crumbling religion something of your new vision. You may possess only a small light, but uncover it, let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of men and women. Give them not hell, but hope and courage." So that was his mission statement, and it resonated with a lot of people. For many years, Universalism was a very successful religion up until probably about the 20th century in the United States. The Universalism was committed to religious freedom. Unitarian and Universalism, I should say, were both committed. So this is where we start to come together in some of our similarities to religious freedom, and fought for separation of church and state by helping to establish non-sectarian education for all. In fact, Horace Mann, the founder of public education, was a Unitarian. We ended up being part of a worldwide anti-slavery convention in 1840, declaring that slavery was contrary to the plainest dictates of natural justice and Christian love, and to the doctrine of universal grace and love, which we cherish as the most important of revealed truth. So our religions, both of these religions, were abolitionists from very early on. In 1845, a free colored man and his family became official members at Mount Olympus Universalist Society in Alabama, of all places. 1845, not 1945. In 1880, the Universalists ordained Joseph Jordan, the first African-American minister, who was really instrumental in founding schools for African-American kids that were staffed by Quakers, Unitarians, and Universalists. The Universalists were also the first official religion, the first organized religion to officially ordain a female as a minister. In 1863, they ordained Olympia Brown. And Brown was the first woman to graduate from a theological school, among the first generation of suffragists, and lived to see the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Let's see, oh my gosh, there are so many famous women from the suffrage movement that were Unitarians. We have Mary Wollstonecraft, author of Vindication of Women's A Vindication of the Rights of Women, and was considered the 18th century foremother of feminism. She was also the mother of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, which makes her Frankenstein's grandmother, I think. Dorothy Dix chose to become a Unitarian as an adult, and of course is remembered for her work establishing hospitals and improving conditions and treatments for the mentally ill. Then came Margaret Fuller, who was born a Unitarian. She was America's first female book reporter and herself the author of the first major feminist book, Women in the 19th Century. She fought for women's suffrage, women's education, prison reform, ending poverty and homelessness, and advocated for racial equality for blacks and Native Americans. And according to her daughter, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, attended a Unitarian church in Stanton, and was an abolitionist and voting rights advocate who also struggled for birth control and property rights for women, and served as the president of the National Women's Suffrage Association. And then let's see, I think we can get Julia Ward Howe in here, who wrote Battle Hymn of the Republic and was another women's suffragist, abolitionist, and social activist who left her Calvinist upbringing to become a Unitarian. So that's a pretty rich history. We were also among the first to begin advocating for better treatment of prisoners and to abolish the death penalty altogether. Couple of interesting characters who were Unitarians were the great Unitarian poet philosophers like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau challenged us to become more inclusive by transcending, both of them challenged us to become more inclusive through transcendentalism, right? So transcendentalism was the idea that why are we continuing to talk about life in Christian terms? Can't we just sort of use this broader idea that we're all connected to something bigger than ourselves, the oversoul, if you will? And that was actually the first big debate in Unitarianism. It was the Transcendentalist controversy, and there were a lot of traditionalists that did not at all appreciate the move away from the Christian heritage. Nevertheless, it seems that in the end, this idea that we should, maybe be a little more open in our in our theological ideas or expressions, seem to be what took hold of the religion. And then another very interesting fellow I'll have more to say about in a minute, but this was John Dietrich. John Dietrich is the father of religious humanism. He was a heretic, convicted of heresy by the Dutch Reformed Church, and immediately became a Unitarian. And the significance of religious humanism was that Dietrich was asking, well, why do we have to use religious language at all? Can't we just be good for goodness sake? Can't we just, as human beings, be a positive force in the world? And that became the humanist debate, which was another major controversy. But I would say that, when you look at the idea that we go back, 2,000 years, or to the Renaissance period in the 1500s, both of those were events where we were recognizing the positive potential of human nature and human power. Right, so of course humanism is going to be born of Unitarianism. Unitarianism is almost synonymous with humanism, right? It is synonymous with humanistic Christology. So it was only normal that somebody would give birth to what not only became religious humanism in the United States, but then also humanism itself. And Dietrich was one of, I think it was 13 or 14, 13 original signers of the Humanist Manifesto, 6 of whom were Unitarians. So we were right there from the beginning. Universalist Aidan Ballou advocated for nonviolence in his book, Christian Non-Resistance. And that went on to influence Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, which influenced Gandhi, who influenced Dr. King. So there's a direct lineage from Universalism to the great work that these figures did. Now, there's a couple of old sayings that Universalists believe that God is too good to damn them, and Unitarians believe that they are too good to be damned. And that is sort of a joke to, the precursor of the merger of the association in 1961, that we had so much in common that we would come together, we could come together and live together. And I think there was an awful lot to that, but there were also some major differences, I believe, and I outline those in my book, The Gadfly Papers, that have been unresolved. Largely class is one of those, and theology is another, right? So I don't think those were resolved. I don't think after the merger we talked about our variant histories because we didn't want these old conflicts to erupt. It created a vacuum in our identity and identity crisis, which has led to the bizarro thing that we have become today, I think, which is the everything bagel of religions, right? Whatever you want to believe goes, and we have no roots or histories or values of our own. So anyway, that's me. Might get me into trouble if I say it too loudly, but we were also among the first religions to actively begin protesting the Vietnam War. I know it was a major concern of a minister at this church, Rudy Gilbert, back in the 60s. But as early as 64, when Unitarian Universalists passed a resolution against the Vietnam War. And then some of you may have heard of James Reeb. He was a young Unitarian minister who was murdered in Selma, Alabama, while they're advocating for civil rights. And 2 years later, Martin Luther King delivered the lecture before our General Assembly. Another great thing that the Unitarians did was speaking of Vietnam, when the Pentagon Papers were illegally dispersed, made available, the Unitarian Universalist Beacon Press dared to publish them. Okay, they believed in freedom of speech and that such information should be known, and so they published these papers, and it was considered illegal, at least the U.S. government, according to the U.S. government. The U.S. government came into our offices in this 1971, I think, and raided all of our documents, and we were heading toward the Supreme Court. Were it not for Watergate that came up later, we probably would have gone to the Supreme Court. So this is the Pentagon Papers, and if you look at that cover, you might recognize that it looks very similar to the Gadfly Papers. And so the cover to the Gadfly Papers is very plain, and a lot of people think, well, he must have really been in a hurry to put that together. But actually, I was hopeful that people who knew our history would look at it and be reminded that this is about freedom of expression. This is the one thing we have to be able to do is speak freely without fear of being punished. And by gosh, that was our tradition. That was our tradition. So again, and then I want to shift a little bit to a history of our church here in Spokane. This is such an amazing congregation, and its history is very rich. It was founded in 1887, so it's been around a long time, and it was founded actually before Spokane was founded. Right. Spokane, I think, was officially founded a year later in 1888. It was still Spokane Falls when the Spokane Unitarian Society was established. And this is an old picture of the building, the church that it initially was in. Ended up being rather drafty and cold, but especially for the winters back in those days. But people tended to bear with it. But this is one of the things I really love about the bylaws that were adopted a year after it was established. It says the authority of its belief is reason, the method of finding its belief is scientific, its aim is to crush superstition and establish facts of religion, and its first principle is freedom of opinion and is subject to no censure for heresy. Yeah. That is our roots, and that is reflective of a Unitarianism everywhere, right? That is where we were at the turn of the century. The first minister came in 1887. Reverend Edwin Wheelock, who was born in 1829, died in 1901. Wheelock was a really interesting character. He was a Civil War officer for the Union, of course, and an abolitionist. And he actually, when he got out of the military, he started 2 freedmen's schools and was responsible for helping to educate over 20,000 former slaves. He also moved to Texas, actually for his wife's health. She needed a drier climate, and started the Texas Republican Party, for which we will forgive him, because that's back when Republicans were Democrats. Now, Wheelock, when he came to Spokane, he came with a bounty on his head, placed there by the entire state of Virginia, wanted dead or alive, for preaching favorably of John Brown, the abolitionist John Brown, and his raid on Harper Ferry. He was very colorful for a first minister. There a few ministers in between him and John Dietrich, but John Dietrich was actually, when he was convicted for heresy, the first and only minister ever convicted of heresy by the Dutch Reformed Church. He wanted actually to come out here and see a girl he'd met. So he used the invitation by the Spokane congregation to come and preach, and he ended up, getting off and seeing that drafty old church and falling in love. He just got off the train right off the river and just fell in love, and he became our minister, and he was here for 5 years, from 1911 until 1916, and it was here that he discovered the freedom to really explore, who he was and what he was about. I mean, when you come into a church whose bylaws say science and reason and crushing superstition, there's a lot of ability to begin to think for yourself. And someone gave him a book, and in the back of it was a reference to humanism. And he said, you know what? That describes my faith. That's who I am. And so he began to use humanism to refer to himself, and went on again to become the father of religious humanism. There's only been two philosophies, Western philosophies, that emerged from the United States. One is pragmatism, John Dewey, and then the other is humanism, John Dietrich. I would also say that John Dietrich, his first sermon was November 7th, 1911. And quite coincidentally, this was not intentional, I didn't learn it till later, I was installed as the minister of this church on November 7th, 2011. So exactly 100 years later to the day. And I see he died in 1957. I was born in 64. Could be the reincarnation. We even look a little bit alike. So Dietrich was so popular as speaker. I mean, keep in mind, Spokane was a really neat place in those days, right? It was a Wild West. I mean, dirt roads, gunfights in the street. But they were liberals out here. I mean, these were people leaving the East, right? And they were coming out here. They were very progressive in their thinking. And this guy was saying things nobody else would say. So he'd have over 1,000 people wanting to hear him on Sundays. So they had to move out of that drafty old building and were meeting at the Clemmer Theater, which I believe is the Fox Theater now. Or is it the Bing? It's the Bing Theater. Is it the Fox? Fox, yeah. So whichever it is. They met there for some time. And after he decided to leave, 5 years after he arrived, this guy came along, M.M. Mangasarian. He was, I think, a Turkish Methodist minister who ended up becoming a free thinker and actually started a free thinker society. Now, he'd written several books. This was, back again in the early part of the 20th century. One of them was called The Truth About Jesus, in which he claimed that Jesus was purely a myth, that there was absolutely nothing historical about him. And he gives a pretty good argument, if you read his book, for believing that might very well have been the case. This is a radical minister, right? To have somebody in 1916 as your minister who says that Jesus was a myth. Very interesting guy. He didn't stick around long. He was here for about a year. And the congregation itself was, loved the success of these two individuals, but they felt that it was much more like a lecture organization than it was a church. And so things began to slow down. They didn't have a building anymore. They didn't have a lot of members, and they went from pillar to post, as they said, and from 1921 to 1937, meeting wherever they could in people's homes, the Spokane Little Theater. And then in 1937, they were actually given the old Jewish temple, the Temple Emmanuel. And they ended up meeting in there, and then in 1944 bought the Glover Mansion, which is still on, 8th Avenue as you're coming down the curve. And today it's an events place, and they had built eventually had to build a larger sanctuary on the hill, which is now, I think, it's a pediatrician's office. So you can still visit it. It's a beautiful spot, but it was hard to have very many people there. So in 1994 they built and moved into the space that we're at now. Now, in its long history here, the UU Church of Spokane has been involved in starting the Spokane Memorial Association, the Spokane Human Relations Council, the Fair Housing Center, the local chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, the local Planned Parenthood office. They were instrumental in starting the Peace Justice Action League of Spokane, have been founding members of the Spokane Alliance, started the Safer Spokane, which was a commitment to changing how we do criminal justice in our community. And some of the great accomplishments I think that we've helped with are ending capital punishment in Washington, at least getting a moratorium on it. There were a lot of local activists in our church who helped convince Governor Inslee to make that move. We were really instrumental in marijuana legislation. In fact, we brought its sponsor here to speak at the church and in our community so that we could help convince enough voters here in the east side of the state to pass this legislation. Why am I forgetting the travel guy who was the sponsor of that bill? What was it? No? You all know. I mean, you listen to the radio, right? Rick Steves. Rick Steves. So he came and spoke in this pulpit on this issue. And then we've been very active in immigration issues, including helping to fund those who get entangled with the law so that they can get out of jail, get legal help, that kind of stuff. We've been involved in changing how coal and oil are transported through our community. I was actually the sponsor of a bill myself years ago that got voted on. It got voted down, but it was the excuse that Governor Jay Inslee needed to stop the last proposed new coal export facility off the shores of Washington. And he even said that in the document, that in the press release, that he was concerned about the health of Spokane with these trains coming through. So we at least stopped an export facility. And then my favorite, my real favorite accomplishment, I think, so when I was in Louisville as a minister there in 2004, Louisville became one of 11 states to officially ban same-sex marriage. Remember, George Bush was running on gay marriage, right? So a lot of states got riled up. Kentucky was one of those that passed a law officially banning same-sex marriage. So I told my congregation that following Sunday, I'm not going to marry anyone anymore till I can marry everyone, right? And so that was my commitment. In fact, Tom Mosier he was just telling me, I haven't seen it yet, but has an article or a letter to the editor in today's paper that talks about this thing we did at our church. But anyway, the church called me to be the minister, knowing that I wouldn't do weddings for people. And I don't, as Tom and I have said, they didn't call me despite my unwillingness to do weddings for anyone. They called me because of it. So this church was right there with me, right? Right there with it. We're going to support. It's not just to tell us that who we can serve at our counter, right? So when this marriage equality bill came up, we got to work, and we ended up, with the help of our friends at Westside UU in Seattle, putting together a billboard campaign. Now to win this marriage equality bill, which, by the way, would have been the first marriage equality bill passed by voters, right? Everything else was passed by legislatures, and then there were bills, referendums, to overturn the legislative decisions. And so that was really what folks were voting on, whether or not to overturn it. Ours would have been the first marriage equality bill passed by voters. And to make that happen, we needed at least well, what was the number I'm thinking of? We needed at least 40% approval on the east side of the state. We had it in King County, but we needed 40%. So 6 months before that election, it was only 25% favorability here on the east side. So we got together with faith leaders from all over the community, and we started a billboard campaign and a campaign called People of Faith Support Freedom to Marry. In addition to press conferences that ended up making it big in the news, where all these ministers were standing around together supporting marriage equality, we put up this billboard. And all of these people you see standing on this billboard are faces of local clergy and religious leaders from the Jewish faith, from the Buddhist faith, the Baptist faith. I mean, there's so many different faces that people would know. We put these up in 3 high traffic areas, and we saw the increase later. We were able to look at the data, particularly in those areas. But when that vote was finally taken, it was 50% countywide and 55% in the city itself favorable towards marriage equality. So we far jumped over the mark. And this really began the cascade of marriage equality laws that led to the Supreme Court, not only in our country, but also in the world, and led to the Supreme Court's decision to finally make marriage equality legal in our country, a constitutional right. So that's something I'm very proud of, but we're a very activist church, right? So, okay, so real quickly, to be a member of UUCS, we really, according to our bylaws, have 3 requirements. Okay? One is to sign our membership book. Okay, and you can do that in person or by proxy. So if you're streaming with us or Zooming with us, we just need it in writing that you want it, of your intention, and then somebody can add your name to our membership book, right? So just basically send us an email and say, yes, I'd like to join. If you're here, we actually have our membership book today, so you can look at it. It's a great old book. It's not the original book, but it has many of the original dates and names in it, so it's pretty cool. We also ask our members to support our congregation in whatever way is meaningful to you, that is doable. We don't have a specific amount that we require you to give, but we certainly appreciate your generosity. And then finally, to participate. You know, we want you to be here, whether it's on Sundays, whether it's streaming with us, whether it's Zooming with us, you know, whatever way you can, joining a team, joining a committee. By the way, I'm looking forward to actually having, a distant, what we call a distance member, somebody who can't be here in person most of the time, being on some of our teams. We're all mostly meeting by Zoom now anyway, so it's a real possibility to have board members that are representative of our membership around North America. So that's it. That is it. Now, I'm going to actually, Todd, do we have some folks on Zoom? Okay, I'm going to let you, if you want, switch to so we can see the screen, and then I'm just going to open it up to some questions, and we'll get our Zoom folks up so that they can ask some questions too if they have any. For those who are streaming with us, I know that you probably have some questions. You won't be able to ask them live, but if you want to shoot me an email, that's fine too. Okay. We're hanging on. A couple of technical problems. Todd will get that up in just a second. And so while we're oh, there they are. Okay. All right, we've got two guys up. Good to see you both. And we'll put you on. We might be able to have you on since it's just a couple of you. If we don't get feedback, we might just go ahead and leave their mics open so they can join us. Yeah. All right. So let me open up. I'm sorry, that was like a whirlwind. I hope it wasn't boring. Too much. So let's go ahead and open it up to any questions that you might have. So yes.
If we are old members and we signed the book a long time ago, do I look for my name with a check mark or sign it again?
Well, if you're an older member and you've been inactive, you can just reactivate your membership. So to be a member in good standing, our bylaws require folks to have a record of contribution, usually in a year's time. Right now, we tend to stretch that out to if we don't see anything from someone for a couple of years. But if it really looks like someone's dropped off the books, then we don't do that. So we also have. I know a lot of folks don't like me to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway because we do have waivers. There's some folks that are just in situations where they financially can't contribute anything. So we do have waivers. I always like to remind folks that a little bit goes a long way in our church because there's so many of us, right? So if you multiply $5 by each of our members, we end up with $6,000 or $7,000. So don't feel like if you can't give thousands of dollars a year or hundreds of dollars a year that your gift is not important because this is the stone soup model, right? We make something beautiful by just putting what we have together. So I'm always willing to grant a waiver to anybody who needs it, but don't feel like a small amount is insignificant because it's significant. We appreciate it. But anyway, bottom line is to answer your question. You would just reactivate it by participating, being here, supporting that kind of stuff. So, yeah, that would be it. Unless you just ritually want to. If you would say, I actually want, this is something new for me and I'd like to come and redate it, you can do that too. We've had people do that. So, yes?
It sounds like membership is really with this congregation, but I'm wondering kind of like what the relationship is of that membership to the membership of the UU organization at large. Are they, and like, I guess as well, like with any financial support we give to the congregation, is there a percentage of that goes up to,
Sure.
corporate?
Yeah, corporate, okay. So the question for those who are streaming and zooming who didn't hear it is really, the membership, is part of our congregation, but what is the connection to the members here and the Unitarian Universalist Association? Is there a percentage of your contributions that go to the Unitarian Universalist Association? That kind of stuff. So if you're a member of this congregation, you're not a member of necessarily of the UUA, but the culture is that the Unitarian Universalist Association likes us to contribute a certain amount per member that we have to be part of the association. Now they don't hold us to that any more than we hold any of our individual members to a certain amount, right? So we give far below what we used to give to the Unitarian Universalist Association, largely because we took a financial hit during the splinter, which the UUA helped cause, so they should suffer that loss, not us. But we still contribute enough to remain part of the organization. So, yeah, the bylaws that have an Article 2 section that says we sort of covenant to affirm these 7 principles is a covenant between the congregations. It's an agreement between the congregations that are part of it, not the individuals in the congregations. So the individuals are pretty separate. And we are autonomous congregations too. So they don't know that anymore, but we are. So they're about to find out. Okay, let's see. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sarah, did you? No? Anybody? No? Did I see another hand? I turned my head for a minute to see our folks on. You guys on? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Todd, I once had the unfortunate experience of joining the organization and going on the board, who was one step away from bankruptcy, and sure enough, they did go bankrupt, and it was personally a very stressful thing. And I'm not asking for the detailed financial records of UU Spokane, but can you give us an idea? I assume it is a solvent organization and that it isn't facing huge debts, or just a general overview of the finances?
Yeah. I would say the finances here are about the same as they've been for the entire 12 years I've been here. As a nonprofit church organization, we are not really sitting on any cash wealth, right? We always seem to have just enough to fill our budget and pay our bills, and that's just kind of the way it is in church life for the most part. So, but yeah, we're solvent. We're doing, we're meeting our budgetary expectations pretty well at this point in the year, and it seems like we always have what we need. So we budget somewhat conservatively. So the way our budgeting process works is we have our fixed cost, right, which is mostly going to be staff salaries, and then what we know it costs to keep the building running, to keep the heat on, and then we start to look at, well, what's the average we might spend to get the snow plowed out of the parking lot, or have certain repairs made, those sort of things. So we tend to try to figure out those fixed costs immediately, and then we start to look at, what do we want? What could we do if we had more? And then we will bump up the budget, not to an impossible amount more than what we know we need, but a bit more. And that helps us to fulfill some of the dreams and larger goals that we have. And usually we meet that. Usually we meet that. If we don't, we'll have what we call a budget summit, where we kind of put the first, initial budget together, and then we'll have our stewardship campaign, or what we call a generosity campaign. And if we reach our goal, fantastic. If not, we'll come back to budget summit number 2, and we'll take a few things out. And we have to actually, Terry, this may be the most important part of the response. We have to present a balanced budget to the congregation to vote on. The congregation approves the annual budget, and our bylaws require it to be balanced. So that keeps us from really going too far astray. We've got to operate within our means.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And then Paul, did you? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it's Stephen.
Oh, Stephen, sorry, yeah. You're a little far away, so I'm trying to see who's on there.
Yeah, right. I think Terry and I and John Smith and Mary Bennett are optimistic about growing our online congregation. And so I wonder whether, since there are certain limitations, whether there would be a requirement to somehow provide something in your bylaws to permit remote membership, individuals who cannot sign the book because they're thousands of miles away. And is that, I'm just thinking about enabling a larger online congregation. I hope to make a pilgrimage to the church. I have a daughter in Portland, so not too far away. But in reality, many of us will not perhaps be able to ever visit the church. And is our kind of membership requires some dealing with in an amendment to your bylaws?
Yeah. Stephen, the answer to that is no, it does not. So again, as far as signing the book goes, we can sign our membership book by proxy. So as long as we have something in writing from you with your intention, then we will add your name. We will consider that an electronic signature, which are very common in this day and age. So no problem signing the book there. Obviously, you can, your ability to participate is different than it is for those of us who can be here in person. But you can participate nonetheless, just as you are right now. And so, you can easily meet the requirements of our bylaws. It's not an issue for us. The real responsibility is on us. How do we together make the experience as good as it possibly can be at this stage with the kind of technology we have? So, the streaming services, we've been streaming our services for many years. And we were streaming them not because we thought a pandemic might come someday, but we were streaming them because we wanted to move beyond the limitations of our sanctuary walls. That our sanctuary is something much more abstract and much larger than this physical space. So we have been anticipating I guess non-local members, if you will, for a long time. The pandemic obviously escalated that. The controversy that I apparently evoked with the UUA has got some interest from folks outside. So it's really been beneficial. But one of the things that we've done since the initial setup for our stream, as you know, is now incorporating Zoom into our meetings and a little bit of opportunity to engage back and forth. So it feels like there's a real presence, and we're really with each other on Sunday mornings. So, but that we can't stop there, right? We have to continue to look at, well, what are some of the needs? How do we involve you in church life? There's a lot of brilliant people who have been Zooming in with us, for example. There's a lot of brilliant people who are streaming with us. And by the way, they're not all distant. About 80% of those who stream with us are locals. They're folks from here in Spokane. But what opportunities do you have to serve the congregation, to participate in some of the events and meetings that we have? That's the real challenge, and I don't think that is something that those of you who are, at a distance should worry about any more than those of us who are here. Their ministry now is figuring out how to incorporate this mixed reality that we're in. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure,
That's
yeah.
great.
No bylaw changes
Certainly.
necessary, man. We are here for you. We're ready. We're here. We want you. We're glad you're here. Yep. Okay. Any other? Yes, a silly one. Oh, good. We need a silly one.
The original building from way back when, where in Spokane was that?
I'm forgetting now the exact street that it was on. I don't think I have it in my notes either. Let me see.
It's obviously not there.
I have it in a sermon transcript somewhere, but it's not there anymore.
Where did the big Spokane fire, didn't it?
I think it did go in the fire, yeah. I should look that up and put it in my notes, so next time, it would take me a couple minutes, but I could actually bring it up, but I'm not going to, because I actually have the corner. I thought that would be a neat tour someday to sort of go to the locations that our church has existed, and talk about some of the rich history. But somewhere right on the river, you could apparently look right down at the river downtown. Yes?
This may be a little more personal than you want to get, but can you speak a little bit to how you came to Unitarian Universalism? And
Sure.
I know you've hinted, at least when I've been here, at kind of your somewhat conflictual relationship with the UUA. But yeah, just kind of where you're at, and if you feel comfortable with kind of your own beliefs as well, and how they mesh with.
A little bit about my beliefs and how I came to Unitarian Universalism, and yeah, so I came real quickly. I was not in a church home. My troubled family life was one that did not involve religion, fortunately. But a sucker for punishment, I found religion on my own as a teenager, and that was back in the 70s when all the old hippies had become born-again Christians. So I became part of the born-again Christian movement, which was nice. Peace, love, Jesus, and all that kind of stuff. But I ended up joining a Southern Baptist church in my community, and the Southern Baptist became, it's a very bit of a rigid faith. But I stayed in it for 10 years. I went to a Southern Baptist college. I became an ordained Southern Baptist minister. Went off to go to Southern Baptist seminary. But while I was studying in college, I really shifted my major to philosophy. And that really opened my mind to, questions and whatnot. Plus I was growing up, right? I was 22, and it was like, okay, I really, I don't believe in that stuff anymore. I've been around long enough now to know how things work, and stuff like that doesn't happen, I won't name what I'm talking about, walking on water, resurrections. Stuff like that. So I really just grew out of it. It wasn't like I fell out of the Southern Baptist faith and there was a falling out or something bad happened. I just was like, I just don't really believe in it anymore. I can't be a Southern Baptist because I don't believe in its tenets. But in many ways, there are no two religions more alike than Unitarianism and the Southern Baptist faith, right? Or Baptist faith in general. So the Baptists also grew out of the same alternative Reformation as the Unitarians, right? The reason the Anabaptists were the first part of this alternate Reformation, and they had a deep respect for the adult's right to choose their religion for themselves. That's why they called them Anabaptists. They get baptized again as adults. It was heresy. They were persecuted for it. But they didn't believe in a church authority. They thought they should be able to call their own ministers, all of these things. And the remnants went on to become Mennonites, Baptists, and Unitarians. And when I was a Southern Baptist, we had something they called priesthood of the believer was one of the doctrines, that there was no intermediary between you and your God. not a priest, not a minister. You were free to decide for yourself what that relationship was going to be like. That changed with the fundamentalist takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention between 1980 and 1990, similar to what we see happening in Unitarianism today. But I still have a bit of a Baptist flair to me, a Baptist passion, if you will. Sometimes I get a Baptist cadence when I'm getting caught up in things. So I think I brought the best part of the Baptists with me, and I appreciate the openness. The Baptists gave us the Baptist Joint Committee, which still exists today. That was the first organization in the country working to maintain separation between church and state, and it still exists today. So the Baptists were initially a very progressive, liberal religion. As far as becoming a Unitarian, when Peggy and we met at the Southern Baptist Seminary, and we got married, and we both left the seminary before we finished. But we missed church. We missed the community. And we said, I hear these Unitarians are like, church without any doctrine. You want to try it? So that's how we got involved. And then that was in 89, and then in 99 I re-entered the ministry as a part-time Unitarian minister, and then I became a full-time Unitarian minister, and then I went into search after 12 years and came here. So I've been in Unitarian ministry now since 1999, so whatever that is, 23, 24 years. And I'm a Unitarian, I think, primarily because I do believe that we should be free to find our own way and not be accosted, and be able to at the same time be part of a community. Why can we not be part of a community where we can love one another even if we don't all have the same beliefs? We've done it around this church for years. We've done it in Unitarianism for decades. There's no reason for the assault on reason that is going on these days. So I think what's going on in the Unitarian Universalist Association is that it has been taken over by a small number of people with a very illiberal, frightened approach to living, right? That we have to protect ourselves at all costs. We have to protect each other at all costs. Everybody's our enemy. We have to cloister ourselves in. And the last thing we can tolerate is hearing something we disagree with. And that simply is not Unitarian Universalism. No how, no way. It is something completely different. So hopefully we can restore it to its senses. I don't think this is a sustainable mindset that they have. But in the meantime, we're going to start working for how can we provide those services to each other that the Unitarian Universalist Association currently is not providing to us. Yeah, so, yes.
Along with that, are there, in your knowledge, other churches, wherever they may be, that are also along the same line of thinking that are not supporting what's going on at the UUA? And
Are there other...
what's being done to kind of come back together? I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. Are there other churches that are sort of, supporting, where I'm at with the UUA, and are there things being done to sort of... maybe come back together, or at least give us an alternate path. Yeah, there are churches that are supportive. The churches that are mostly supportive tend to be churches that are unministered, what we call fellowships and smaller congregations in rural communities. That tend to be rather distant from the UUA to begin with, that don't get caught up in it. I regularly speak at a couple of those in our region. I say our region because they're 5-6 hours away driving, and I'm actually going to Alabama to speak to one this month. But the churches are all sort of at their own place. There's only really one congregation I know of that this issue, really came home and did not cause major upheaval, and that's the one in Salem, Oregon, where Rick Davis, my good officer, is minister, and he really had the full support of his congregation. But most of the congregations that are that I know of, the ones that have ministers, they're splitting. They're in torment. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the horror stories. You wouldn't believe the things that are going on in these churches, the things that are happening to shut people down and silence them, and you can't teach a class on Unitarian history because it might hurt somebody's feelings. Those kind of things are really going on in churches right now. Or people say, oh, you can't teach that unless you teach the other side, because it wouldn't be fair, right? It's like George Bush saying, I just believe in teaching both sides of the evolution thing, right? Remember that? Yeah. We got to teach both sides, and it's like, no, I'll teach my side and you teach your side. We'll teach them in the same church. That's fine. But I don't have to teach your side. You express yourself, I'll express myself. I don't have to express yourself. So, but those kind of things are happening, and most of the congregations, I think, that are aware of this, I often say, in the UUA, you either don't know what's going on, you don't care what's going on, or you're in conflict over what's going on. And conflict is the best place to be. A lot of ministers are just laying low. They don't want to bring the conflict in. They don't want to lose their credentials. Hey, we're Unitarian Universalist ministers. We got to have guts. That's what we're here for, right? That's what we're here for. We're not here to keep our jobs. We're not here to play it safe. But yeah, there's a lot of it going on. So what are we going to do about it? And I'll talk more about this Sunday in a church Zoom meeting. This Wednesday, I should say, in a Zoom meeting at 6 o'clock. I mentioned last week about starting the NAUA, the North American Unitarian Association. And this is really something we're seeing as an organization that is not separate from the Unitarian Universalist Association, but that will enable us to start to recreate some of those badly needed services that we need. We created the UUA to give us those services. The UUA has abandoned us, and so let's put our resources and energy towards recreating those systems. We can easily do it again. One of the biggest ones being, how do we get liberal ministers in our pulpits? Because if we're being supplied ministers who have been forced to accept this draconian mindset, then those will come into these pulpits and they will fundamentally alter the nature of this congregation to the point it wouldn't be recognizable. I'm not going to let that happen to this historic church. You saw the history. We cannot let that happen, and we can't let it happen to Unitarian Universalism in general. So, yes?
Is the link for that Zoom meeting up on the website, or is that something that...
The link to that Zoom meeting, I believe, is on the website in the latest Sun. And also, you should get a weekly email with the link, the meeting links in it. So you should be able to get it that way.
I feel like that doesn't always have the meeting links in it, but maybe I'm looking for the wrong place.
The Sun?
Yeah.
The Sun, yeah. Okay, so are you getting emails from the church?
Yes.
Okay, so you should get a weekly email from, it says like, just type in UUCS, and it's a list of links of the different meetings that should go in there this week. I think they put that out on Tuesday.
And that's just from signing up for just the Sun newsletter?
Yeah, as long as you're on our email list, you should be, you don't get that.
I've gotten a separate Zoom one.
Okay,
I haven't signed up.
so, all right, so,
Zoom link was at the bottom of that weekly email that came out, so.
yeah, so you're not, but you're not getting the weekly email, you're just getting the Sun is what it sounds like.
Yes.
Okay, so we want to make sure we get you on the email list. Sonny, can you help take care of that after this? Because we want to get that to you. Yeah, and if you don't get it before Wednesday, call the office and ask them to send it to you. We want to get you on. There's a weekly email that goes out with the link to the board meeting, to the Kakara Dojo, to if there's an operations team meeting, anything that is, we like to put all our meetings on because we like to be transparent, so.
Yeah, that email I've never gotten. It's
Okay.
just signed.
All right, good question then. So we want to make sure you get on that. So did you have another? Yeah.
I just wanted to verify, because But I remember when that process was happening, that we were able to vote for who we wanted, like the, yeah, so the members of the congregation actually voted for who they wanted to put forward as the minister. Are you saying that the UUA just kind of puts people?
Well, so the question is, the congregation does get to approve the minister who comes, right? But what happens is the process by which we get those ministers is through a system the Unitarian Universalist Association has set up. Right now, liberal ministers are not getting through their process. It's only ministers that have agreed to this new way of thinking, which is to shut people down. And I see the pain and the problems that those ministers are causing in congregations, and it is not pretty. So I don't think this congregation would vote for such a minister, right? But then where are you going to get a minister? Right? Again, I'm not planning on leaving anytime soon, but I will leave at some point. I may have to leave at some point. You don't know. We don't know what the future holds. So we've got to fix this. This is a major problem. We've got to fix it as soon as possible.
And that's Wednesday's.
Wednesday's meeting will be me talking about this organization, yes, to answer questions about it. Because what I hope is that our congregation will become a founding member of the NAUA. But it's going to require, people understanding what it is and what it means and answering those kind of questions. So, yeah. Yes?
So as far as once we become a member, getting more involved,
Mm-hmm.
like I've been attending the book club, which I adore.
Okay.
And choir and things like that, but as far as the types of things we're talking about, these heavier things,
Mm-hmm.
like, is there a place we can go to see how to become more involved in those more administrative or, the ins and outs of the church? And also being a mom of 2 teenage boys, we're a really busy family,
Uh-huh.
and not being able to necessarily commit to being here every single time,
Mhm.
doing my very, very best.
Yeah, so exactly. So the question is about, how to be involved, how to know what opportunities there are, and also being busy and only being able to do so much. So there is a page on our website, I should have brought it up, that lists the different teams and groups that meet. So there's those activities like the book group that you're part of, the Tuesday night group, the Kurkara Dojo, things that are kind of for our edification that go on. And then there are a variety of teams that you could join and be part of. So, the building and grounds team, for example, is a team that does a lot of work to sort of help us keep the facility up in between the major repairs and things we have to pay a professional to do. There are teams like the new member team that is here. Would the folks who are part of our new member team stand up or wait? Yeah. So we've got 2 of them here. Sue was here earlier. I think she had to leave a little bit early, and Jean, but they had to leave a little bit early. So that's like a 4-member team. One of the teams we're going to be looking for new members for, if you're interested, is what we call our generosity team. That's the team that helps to sort of put together our annual stewardship campaign. So there's a lot of things like that. If we're always looking for new board members as folks rotate off, especially newer members to help represent. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. And if there's something in particular that you're interested in, and one thing to keep in mind is that when people have professional jobs, sometimes we want to go to them and say, you're an attorney or whatever it is. Can we get some legal advice from you? Or you're a mechanic. Would you fix our car? Right? Well, sometimes that's great. Some people think that this is what I do best. Absolutely. But no, that's what I do to make a living. I want to do something completely different. Right? So decide which one you are. And think about the things that you want to do. Maybe you have skills. Maybe you want to develop skills here. So.
Can you speak about what's in the envelope you put together?
Oh, you have a new member.
The razor on the front.
Yeah, so we should probably start to move that direction. So a couple things. We do have our membership book here. That those who are here in person, if you wanted to sign it and become a member today, you can do that. Again, for those of you who are Zooming with us or streaming with us, shoot me or the office an email and let us know of your intention, and we will add your name to the book, and we will then mail a new member packet. Is that what we're calling it? Is that a new member packet?
Actually, what
Oh,
it is
a new member envelope.
a welcome.
Here, do you mind coming up here, Michelle? Just so folks can hear you who are Zooming and streaming with us as well. Just, we're doing jump rope here, so.
Yeah, it's just kind of a basic.
Here, wait until you come up to the microphone. I'm going to help you step over
I'm
this. Is that okay?
I don't want to get you sick, so I'm going to try to stay
Okay.
away from the
Well, that's
mic.
why I'm still going to take your arm, okay?
And
Okay.
so we have what's called a welcome packet, and it has, this is basically about the Unitarian Church, Unitarian Universalist Church. This is more specific about the Spokane Church, our specific church. This is the Unitarian Covenant, what Unitarian Universalists believe. It's a little thing you can carry in your wallet. And then these bookmarks. So it's a little kind of a synopsis of what Todd has gone over today. That if you haven't already picked one up, they've been out by the welcome table. You're welcome to pick one up.